So we're gonna use bats. You can use, these are gonna be probably the best to use, but if we run out of these, you can use the other ones. One side fits on tight, as some of you know, and one side doesn't. So if you want, grab a smidge of clay and use it to kind of glue that one down. It might just help a little bit. When you get your clay, you want to make sure that this part's not flat. So make sure that whatever part you're slapping down on the wheel, that it is round. If it's flat, it's going to trap a piece of air under here and make it really hard to get centered. And if you want, you can start what we call slap centering. We usually use slap centering when we're using big pieces of clay, but it's all right to do this every, just a few times before you get started. You have dry hands. You slowly spin your wheel, and I'm kind of going down and in, down and in. And then we're going to go ahead and get that centered. I like to cone up. You have to be careful when you're coning up that you don't get this little hole. You want that very top part to be the tallest point. And then when you're coning down, you do not want to do this. See where you get a mushroom? You want to make sure when you're coning down that you're using this hand at an angle. See how this hand is pushing at an angle? I like to cone up and down a few times. I feel like it just kind of prepares my clay, helps me get centered. Now, in order for this to work, I have to be really secure in my anchor on the left side. I want you to pay attention to how I do not stop going full speed for these first 3 or 4 steps. All right, so I'm centered. You want to have a nice dome, and you know, about that wide. In for the center hole like I taught you. Your finger is at an angle, but your fingertip or fingerprint is going straight down. We do this so that we can see inside the pot. You want to leave about a finger thickness at the bottom. I still have not stopped my wheel. I'm filling this up with water, at least halfway. The reason you do that is because if you don't have water in there and you start pulling your floor back, you're going to run out of water, and then your hands are going to start sticking. Your fingers are. So you want to have water in there so that as you pull this back, your hands don't stick. You don't want to get halfway back and then have to stop and start, stop and stop. The less you stop and start, the better. All right, so there's my floor. And now I'm pressing down on my floor, kind of compacting it, making sure it's flat. And this is a dragonfly. This is what we're going to be using to measure so that we all are making the exact same pot. I like to keep the rim a little bit smaller than the bottom floor. So when I'm using this width, I'm kind of trying to eyeball that it is about the size of the floor, not the rim. I feel like if your rim is in, it helps. As you start pulling, if your rim comes out, it's more difficult to bring in. Okay, so nice 90 degree angle down there. All right, check out this first pull. Just like when you're learning how to make cylinders, I still want you to try to get the majority of your cylinder made in 3 pulls. And this is a little trick to doing that. So we're going to use what we call a claw hand. So we put our hand like this, inside and outside. The thumb is on the outside below and the inside is a little bit above. I like to put this hand and sponge over my thumb. And this only works for the first pull because it's the only time that I can get my claw on both sides, okay? My claw hand on both sides. So I'm super stabilized in this position. I do find that I run out of water here. See how I'm bringing it up and in? Like so. So I just got about 5 inches out of that first pull. And now we'll go in to our normal pulls. So pushing in here at the bottom and pulling up. Again, pay attention to how I am keeping this coming in and not going out. Now, I need to explain something. This bottom has to be this wide, the same as the top has to be this wide. But what people often do is when they're pushing on the outside, they let that outside push the inside. So when you are starting at the bottom, you don't want this finger to push this finger in, because then the bottom just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, right? We need to keep this hand stabilized and squeeze the clay between this finger and this finger. Squeeze it. And each time, like the first time you just squeeze it a little bit, and the next time you squeeze it a little bit more. That's how your wall gets thinner and thinner, okay? So here's my next pull. And actually it's getting a little wide, so I'm gonna choke this a smidge. See how when I'm choking, I'm using all of my hand and all of my fingers? I'm not just choking like this, okay? I'm using kind of everything and just compressing that. Make sure that you get your pot wet every time you go to pull the wall. So see how I'm putting my hand on the rim and getting it wet. Okay, so here we go. Squeezing that clay in between. I apply less pressure as I get to the top because I just know that's always a little bit thinner. All right, so that I think was my third pull, and now I'm gonna measure. So with the dragonflies, we measure on the inside. So I need to get this much taller. This one's a little crooked, but this much taller. And then at the very end, I'm just gonna pop that out to get it a little bit wider. Now, I'm gonna try to get some more weight up off of here. So I'm just pushing my fingers together a little bit more. The inside finger is above my outside finger. Now I'm gonna bring it out a smidge, but I just made that too tall. Okay, now it's too tall. That's all right. So watch this trick. With the wooden rib, I'm going to, as I come up, I am gonna make this a little bit wider. I'm gonna skip this part because this part is where there's extra weight, and so I'm gonna wanna trim that off at the end. So I'm gonna use my wooden rib and bring that wall straight up. Like so. I'm gonna wait till the very end to trim that rim off. And now I can use, I got this wet, my wooden knife, to trim that extra weight off. So this is done a little bit differently than how you've done it in the past. As you get better and better at throwing, this is less and less clay. So now we want these to be straight up and down. This is a 90-degree angle. So I'm gonna put it down here on the bat. On the inside, my finger is going up that rim. Okay, so I'm pushing up into that rib, going all the way up, like so. Now I'm gonna measure again. There's lots of measuring. So now I can kind of see how much clay I need to cut off the top. When you're cutting off the top, you want to make sure this rim is wet. If it's not, your fingers are gonna stick and you're going to get your pot off center. So to cut off the rim, I am taking my thumb, my needle tool, and I'm pressing up against my thumb. I'm gonna go through that rim very, very slowly until I hit my finger. So I'm gonna take about this much off and pop that off. Now to smooth that out, we're gonna hold on to that with our pincher fingers just the same way. And I see a lot of people just do this. You don't wanna do that because you're gonna mess up your rim. So you're gonna hold on to this and you're going to kind of like press it around both sides. See how my fingers are letting it go on both sides so that it's round on the inside and outside. It's really important when you're doing production that our rims look the same too. Once we start throwing a whole bunch of these, you guys will be able to tell like how different it makes it look if the rims are not the same. Okay, so moving on, there is another measurement on this Firefly, and it is 1.5 inches. We're gonna go 1.5 inches from the top. So we're gonna put this here. I'm gonna put my finger right where that mark is, and we're just gonna go around to make that line. And then for this rib, we're gonna use the bigger curves here. You wanna make sure the inside of your pot and your hands are slippery for this. Now this is tricky because you have to push the rib into your hand. Be careful not to push your fingers into the rib. If you push your fingers into the rib, then the pot gets wider here. We want the pot to stay straight up and down, but these this design to go into the pot. So I'm going to push, keeping this in one spot. My fingers are supporting it on the inside. Push that rib into my fingers, okay? If you want, you can clean this up a smidge. We don't really want to go a lot over that. I encourage you to play around with using the metal rib as a very finishing touch. I'm not scraping it. I'm just kind of pressing and smoothing that clay out. Like so. You're going to take your wire tool, cut it, and then to get these bats off, one side is always a little hard. I take this and just kind of pop it off. So just looking over this a little bit, thinking about what kind of refinements I need to make on my next one. I need to work on making sure that this ribbed part doesn't go out too much. So the undercut looks good. The rim looks good. Again, try not to touch it after you've thrown it. We'll let them get leather hard. We will stamp them. We will add a decal on them.